Hi, good evening. Can everybody hear me? No? No, how's that? Good, okay. I'm Joanna Marsh. I'm the James Dicke Curator of Contemporary Art here at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and it's a pleasure to welcome you this evening. Tonight's program is our third annual James F. Dicke Contemporary Artist Lecture. This series honors Mr. Dicke for his outstanding leadership on the American Art Museum Commission, his years of service to this museum, and his incredible generosity, his contributions both to our collections and our programs, in particular our contemporary art initiatives. So we thank Jim Dicke and are really excited to present the program tonight. Jim's patronage of the arts extends also to his support of contemporary artists whose work he avidly collects. And our lecturer this evening, or lecture, is inspired, in fact, by Jim's ongoing and early interest in the work of Mark Bradford. And we're really thrilled to have Mark with us tonight, and also to have a major work of his on view in our third floor Lincoln Gallery, a painting called Amendment Number 8, which I think Mark is going to address in his lecture. Before I introduce Mark, I just want to say a few quick kind of housekeeping words. First of all, if you could silence cell phones and all other electronic devices, in particular iPads, I'm told, have become quite pervasive in these programs. There's going to be a short question and answer period following the lecture. If you do have a question, which we certainly encourage, if you could go up to one of the two microphones that are positioned in the aisles so that our audience who's tuning in via live webcast can hear both your question and Mark's answer. And following the Q&A, we invite everyone in the audience to come and join us in the Kogod Courtyard for an informal reception and an opportunity to chat more with our special guest. It's now my privilege to introduce Mark Bradford. Bradford was born in Los Angeles, California, where he continues to live and work. He received an MFA from the California Institute of the Arts in 1997 and began showing his work just a few years later. Over the last 15 years, Bradford has become known for large-scale paintings and installations that draw from and respond to the very fabric of contemporary urban experience. Using everyday materials such as scavenged posters and billboard remnants, Bradford transforms the banal debris of commercial culture into expressive abstractions. The artist applies these salvaged elements in a process that can be best described as painting with paper, building up his surfaces and then sanding them down to reveal the work's hidden topography, stratum upon stratum of multicolored paper gestures. Bradford likens this laborious process to the way that ancient civilizations and even contemporary cities are formed and then refashioned. His multi-layered compositions pulsate with the energy of today's urban landscape, and channel narratives about race, power, and politics. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mark Bradford.
Can you hear me? This is better. Okay, let me get this. Plan this a little bit better. Right here we go. All right. So, hello. Get right going. I tend to like to not preload them or make existing PowerPoints or something. I like to think about the audience and think about what I'm trying to say. And so that's the starting point. Oh, I can do it here too. Either way. Let's see which one I like better. Okay, so I'm going to start with little Mark, right? The reason why I started with this is because I kind of wanted to set the stage. This is probably maybe when I was 11. And I was identifying, or what was coming, that was a creative person. I didn't have a word for it. I didn't have a word that I was an artist, but I did have this impulse to make things. I think this is, it's a potter's wheel that my mom bought me for Christmas, and I think that's actually Christmas Day and me sitting there very intently throwing pots. And what I did know at that time, I was 11 years old, is that I was beginning to be associated with being sensitive, being crying a little bit too much for boys, for being creative. In other words, sissy, kind of like around that time I was starting to hear the word sissy. And to me, sissy doesn't have anything to do with sexuality. It has to do with other people pointing at you and saying, there's something about you that's a little different, or there's something about you that's a little too sensitive. There's just something about you, so we're just going to leave you to your own devices, which for me was great. The pack kind of left me alone, and I left the pack alone. So this is me kind of starting my whole creativity and moving forward. I always kept myself real entertained. I'm going to talk a little bit about don't I look just like my mother? So that's my mom in the hair salon. That was my mom doing hair in the kitchen in the 50s in Philadelphia, where we're from, and then my mom's hair salon on the right. And again, I was very much, my mother didn't believe in having a babysitter. So my career was always in the hair salon. And I grew up with textures and voices and languages and preparations and hair. This was just my material palette kind of growing up. And when my mom got really busy, I'd always go in the back and style the wigs for her. She'd say, oh, honey, go in the back and style the wigs. I'm running a little bit late. And I was 11 years old, about like that, styling wigs in the back. And this is me moving forward. This is when I was in Cal Arts, putting myself through Cal Arts. So I press a little hair, read a little Foucault, press a little hair, read a little Foucault. It really is how it really was. I was like, girl, read that back to me again. What did Foucault say about existentialism? So it really was like that. Let me talk a little bit about, although we always had a hair salon in what you might call black Los Angeles, it was not a integrated hair salon, it was a beauty shop. My mom had a beauty shop. And, but we also, by 12 years old, lived in all-white Santa Monica, which was a suburb of Los Angeles. So I kind of grew up on the beach sometime and also grew up in the hair salon. But my mother never made a difference. She never said, these people are better than these people, or I just went between two. So for me, moving between sites, culturally, racially, was never a big issue. So when I got out of school, and I owed $150,000 to Cal Arts, which I had no intention of paying back. I went back to the hair salon, and where am I getting $150,000 from? And I knew that but it's the truth, right? I mean, it is what it is. Where was I getting 100? Is Mark there? Nope. Click. And we had a payphone in the hair salon. Actually, I think the payphone was right on that wall. So when it would ring, I'd pick it up, and they'd say, "Is there a Mark Bradford there?" And I'd go, "Nope." Click. So, but I began to think about the material world of how I made money. And I started looking at the materials as being art materials. And I thought, well, how can I bridge socially and economically what's around me with this impulse to be a painter? And I think the reason why I chose painting is because I was black and because my studio was in South Central, I didn't like people telling me what they thought that meant. Oh, I know South Central. Oh, gangster rap or hip hop. I didn't like people telling me. So I thought, no, I'm going to have a studio in South Central and I'm going to do abstract painting. How about that? I'm going to look at this environment around me and I'm going to abstract it. How about that? Kind of thud, disappointment, right? But I was creating a space to play. I was creating a space to say, I don't know. And these early paintings, I started burning the end papers. Now, the ladies will know what an end paper is. An end paper is, and people get Jerry curls. So there's two different people in this audience. Jerry curls, and wet sets. White people, black people. And most of the black people were so young, I don't even remember Jerry curl. Yes, I had a Jerry curl, damn it. Don't judge, don't judge. Anyway, so I started making papers. I started burning the end papers that came from doing a wet set. And I started making This is called Jerry Now and Curl Later. Actually, that is the title of this work. But what I was trying to do was connect the material of my everyday life that had this social memory with starting to think about abstraction, but not an abstraction that turns inwards and that excludes the exterior, but really looking at the exterior of the world and saying, I can take that material in and almost like with alchemy, make it into something that is political, it's plural, it's outward looking. I call it kind of social abstraction. This was called Biggie, Biggie, Biggie. I was still playing a little bit with language, and hip-hop was the loudest voice in the late 90s. It wasn't the only voice, but in my community, it was the loudest voice. And so I'll talk a little bit about the 1992 riot, because the 1992 riot actually created the material that most of my work came from. So this is 1992 Crenshaw, not too far from my studio. I think I was in school and working in the hair salon when the riot kind of burned. I like to call it riot because it sounds much more, it's a riot, you know, it's not civic unrest, you know. It was, so I'll just go through these images and we can talk about them. There was a 60s riot in Los Angeles, and then there was a 1992 riot. So there's been a couple of them. And the freeways are interesting in Los Angeles because they separate people, they bisect communities and which side of the freeway, north or south you live, or west or east. I'm sure you have it in the DC area as well. This is actually Crenshaw, and it's funny, in 1992, so we had a curfew at 6 o'clock, and I worked in a hair salon. So at 6 o'clock, everybody would come in, it was like a juke joint. You come in from the back, put up a black curtain, and keep basically, you know, business as usual. But what came out of that was, once everything was burned down, they put up all these cyclone fencing, and what sprang up was a lot of these informal businesses, these kind of merchant economies, these parasitic systems that kind of took advantage of the local citizens. We buy your houses. Are you losing your houses? Do you want your hair braided? Do you plumbing, easy loans? And slowly, as the demographic and immigration changed, it kind of Spanish they would become in Spanish as well, divorce and custodia. So for me, walking back and forth, it became a palimpsest. It became this very rich kind of social vocabulary that I started to pull from. Sexy cash. I don't know why the cash has to be sexy. I just, you know, you wake up in the morning and like a thousand merchant posters are all over the community, whereas they weren't there the night before. So I think I gathered like 1,000 of these and I made work out of them. That was me when I had hair. And again, so as I said earlier, I started off with using material from the hair salon, these end papers, but I found myself digging myself into a kind of a hole. Kind of black female spaces, South Central, his mama was a hairdresser, he was a hairdresser, blah, 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 blah. And for me as an artist, I found that my freedom and movement started to get restricted because they were writing about me in a way that I might have set up either consciously or unconsciously, but as an artist, you gotta keep moving, or I have to keep moving, because for me, it's always about moving. You ever been in a bad situation and you always say, oh, tomorrow's gonna be better, tomorrow's gonna get better? Well, it does kind of get better. And I always kind of just always felt like the movement would make it better. So I started using another type of paper, billboard paper, again, from the kind of public domain, but had nothing to do with the private spaces of black women, because I was getting very uncomfortable about talking about those spaces because it kind of wasn't my space to talk about, really. I was a hairstylist, so I started adding a different type of paper. And these are the merchant posters that came out of it, done with string and twine and billboard paper. I started tracing the text. Vote now for later, that's good. Lucky Brand. That's a sexy cash. And what happens is they don't belong, again, to the urban environment anymore, and they don't just belong to art history. They're a relationship between the two. They're me. They're my relationship to the parts. Oh, those turn out really good, yeah. What I mean is the image quality. The last time I gave a talk, the image quality wasn't as tight. So I'll talk a little bit about another kind of socially charged place that I did a work after Hurricane Katrina. Prospect One decided to do a biennial. They invited me, and I said, oh, that'd be really interesting, and I went down. And me and my assistant at the time, we saw so much devastation that I was very uncomfortable photographing the homes and houses that had people's deaths. So to get my bearings, what I would do is I would go and photograph the houses that were talking about animals, because I felt like I could do that. I was comfortable showing a slide. So this is one cat scene outside, a beagle taken. And it's funny, we talk about the lives, the human beings, but they never talk about the animals that were displaced so much there. And I took a lot of pictures of just the fronts of houses that were speaking about the animals. Shepherd scene. And so when I was working down there for about a year, I was gathering these plywood barricades from Los Angeles, and I wanted to create a vessel or a container. I pushed it back into kind of Mithra and the sacrifice of the bull, and from the loins of the blood, all humanity will spring. But I wanted to create a vessel, and I also wanted to talk about the fact that people being a vessel and that hope lodges in them. Although although New Orleans had devastation, the spirit of the people was absolutely present and wanting to rebuild. So it kind of came out of that. And I kind of built it the same size as a housing project that was right next to it. And the people in the community actually got the land for me. I worked with a nonprofit for over a year called L9, which was in the lower 9th Ward. We did a big fundraiser. They raised money, and they got up and running again and being sustained. And out of that came the conversation. They really wanted me to do that. And they picked the place in the back of the lower 9th Ward, so that people who came to the biennial had to travel all the way to the back and really see what had happened in the lower 9th Ward instead of just going to the more safer areas. This was way off the beaten track. Completely at night, there was no electricity. One night I came and there was National Guard standing over the whole thing on top. They were just standing with guns, and I walked up and I said, why are you standing on top of the sculpture? And they said, well, this could be a terrorist attack. Or I said, well, no, it's just it's an artwork. It's my artwork. So it was dangerous at night when the lights went out. But during the biennial, people had to experience more than just the safe museum spots. I still have this sculpture because it was so strong to me. It still smells like it smells like the lower 9th Ward. I did another public space at the Los Angeles International Airport, which is interesting. As a child, I used to love to go, about the time early when I was playing with the potter's wheel, I got fascinated by airports and airplanes. So my mom would always take me to the airport, and I'd always watch the airplanes, and I could define what was United and Western and American and 747, 737, 730. I love people coming and going in vulnerable spaces. And when they approached me, did I want to do something at Los Angeles International Airport? Just brought all the times when I was a boy wandering through. So I did a large sculpture. These are just my process images of how I come to it. That's me in my old studio. I wanted to use the kind of material of urbanness, very much like the Mithra, but I wanted to use something that was recognizable in sports. So it was based on the Jumbotron of sporting events, and it's covered in the plywood barricades that you would see that was from Mithra, and it feels like it's both ancient and dead technology at the same time, because the airport is about keeping time, and it's huge. It's 30 feet by 30 feet by 30 feet. And I'd never done a public commission of this scale. You know, I'm the type of person that if it sounds interesting, I'll give it a try. You know, it's like if you have two hairs on your head and you come in and you want to look like Whitney Houston, well, I'll give it a try. You know, it's like, let's see if we can do it. You know, I'm always up for the challenge. Gonna need a little help, you know, a little weave, but so this is how large it was. And it sits right over TSA. The interesting part about it, again, I love dialogues that exist outside. It's just like, what is this? But what I love about it is it's if you saw that in the museum, it makes sense. If you see that over TSA in the airport, it doesn't make sense. But I love the conversation of taking our conversations out of our museums, outside of our galleries, and putting it, inserting it back into what I call the social sphere, the mainstream. You call that art? You know, I love that. I love to yes, I do call it art, and let me tell you why I call this art. And I like the conversations that happen outside. And it's really great because the TSA people had so many people asking about it. I'm going to go give a talk to the TSA people in the lunchroom, and they can become docents. Give it a try, you know. And they ask you, how much, is that really true that it costs $3 million? I said, no, it costs $9 million. You know, just myth, like on top of myth. You know, and so Scorched Earth is a show that I'm having at the Hammer Museum. And it all is about, in 1980, I was 18 years old. It was this huge epidemic kind of hit really hard. The demographic was sort of me, sort of people who stayed out all night, partied all night. It was that kind of hysteria and propaganda before things became political. It was mythological. But at the same time for me, because at 18 years old, I didn't go to university. I worked in the hair salon. I wasn't even thinking of that at 18 years old. A lot happened in kind of the black community at that time. It was the rise of kind of in South Central of gangster rap. It was the rise of crack cocaine. It was the rise of sort of a Reaganomics. It was the rise of AIDS. It was the rise of the big faith church. It was the rise of so many things happening at one time. It was like a big pot of gumbo. And so this hysteria, I remember as a kid, and 18 and 19 years old, it reminded me so much of the hysteria around Ebola. When I started hearing about, we don't want them here, we're afraid of our children, close the borders. I said, oh God, this hysteria kind of reminds me of the early 80s. And so the whole show is about the body being vulnerable. When I was 18 years old, my body became vulnerable. It's sort of like, oh, okay, there goes being young and reckless out the window. But even though you're still young and reckless because you're 18 or you're 19. So these have to do with these are microscopic AIDS cells, and they're paintings, obviously. This is called Dead Hummingbird. They have a microscopic, but also topographical as well, same. Up close, you can. They're lacerated. They're cut in. The incisions. All of the marks are made by cutting in and lifting them out and creating like a cavity. So. That's a nice painting. And again, music was so much a part of it. These are sanded album covers of what was popular in sort of the early, so what singers were popular at that time. I just kind of left the trace of the album cover and just sanded the trace. To kind of, I always like traces of civilization, traces of a conversation, details that point to a thing. This is a map of per 100,000 people with AIDS in this country. It's a Hammer project wall. So the project wall has so many other artists that have done project walls. I'm just going to scratch back in and find all of the paint that was underneath. So it's like excavating or using what was there. Again, recycling. I also do these kind of stain paintings. It's the residue paintings. I use a very inky paper, and it's almost it's a little bit like fresco. It's wet on wet, and it's applied very quickly, and you end up with these kind of trace, almost stains. I call them stains. This kind of idea of being stained and not being pure, something that's stained. But they also have a weird Chinese landscape-ness feeling to them. I actually studied Chinese landscape. I went to Korea a few years ago again and studied Chinese ink and paper. I just love the ink and calligraphy. So this is kind of what I'm working on now. These are kind of what I call waterfalls. They're the remnants of paintings that I work on. I started draping them over these what is that? The beams in that's my studio, so those are the beams. But there's a word for it. What is the word, Tate? Rafter. Rafter, right. There you go. The rafters in my studio. And I like the way that there's a fragileness. It references painting in a way, but it kind of feels sculptural as well. And I put these in because, I'm really interested and I'm curious where they're going, and I think it's a new direction, and I don't know and I'm not quite sure. And what I'll do with something like this, I will put it up and it will be in my studio for a year. And I have dragged that thing around like an old rag doll. It's been in one part of the studio, and because every day that I look at it and I think about it, it reveals itself to me. I'm not ready for a show with it, but I know it has something. That's why I like to kind of put things in, and when I'm talking about things that I'm not quite sure of, God, who just wants to hear everything you know? It's like, I told you so. So the amendment painting is, I did a series of amendment paintings. I became very interested in the historical documents of our country because we always go back to them in crisis. We always go back to the amendment, we go back to the Bill of Rights. Marriage goes back to the Bill of Rights, all these things. And so I thought, I just really wanted to read and do work about the Bill of Rights. What I learned is they're very dense and also strangely very fluid. We amend them, we change them, we move them on. So I wanted to make a series of text paintings that were partly legible, but obscured as well. And this was amendment number 8. And the amendments came out of a series of work that I did on the Eisenhower diaries, his biography called At Ease. I've always been interested in freeway systems. And I found fascinating that so was Eisenhower. He was fascinated in the Second World War. He was fascinated by the Autobahn. This is actually the Autobahn in Germany. And he was fascinated by the efficiency of the Autobahn in the Third Reich. And I was like, whoa, that's interesting. And he came back, and actually, the first project in the United States was Eisenhower's bill that the whole 10 freeway, the Transcontinental Highway, and the whole system was built under this very dark history. So I did a show called Through Darkest America by Truck and Tank, and that was the chapter in Eisenhower's biography that talked about the railway system and his relationship and traveling. He traveled all across the U.S., Transcontinental Highway, looking at our highway system as a lieutenant when he was young. So he had a fascination with the freeway system. Freeways can be brutal. They can divide neighborhoods. They can be... and this is actually, the text in this work is from his journal as he was passing through Indian country, when he was a lieutenant, not when he was in the Second World War. Again, parts you can read, parts are obscured. I don't think I will ever know the whole. It's like if you tell someone tomorrow about this lecture, it's never going to be this. Even if it's webcast, podcast, it's never going to be this. But in the telling, it retells itself and it morphs into something else. And I'm okay with things moving and becoming fluid and changing. By the time you get to it 5 years from now, it's going to be, yeah, I heard he was up there completely butt naked and drunk. Was it the truth or was it not the truth? It's somewhere in between. I'm not naked, but I might be a little drunk. So this is the text from his journal. This is the freeway system, which is extensive in Los Angeles, in the 10. The 10, actually, I didn't know, is basically used in case of military. It can be closed down, and the military can go from Los Angeles all the way up to New York by taking the 10. So it really is a military highway, which I found kind of interesting. And these are topographical maps looking down. And again, me abstracting it. Again, so what I did was I collapsed in this painting called Through Darkest America by Truck and Tank. I collapsed the Los Angeles freeway system with the Autobahn, and the German Autobahn, just to see how I felt about it and to make an abstract painting. Again, giving me freedom. It's not based on the Autobahn anymore. It's not even based on Eisenhower anymore. It's Mark grappling with these things. It's my position to it as an artist, moving in and out of politics, moving in and out of race, anything I feel like talking about it. That's a big painting, by the way. It's like 10 feet by 16 feet. It was the last of about 13 paintings that I made for the show. And I will talk a little bit about my foundation. So I think my foundation, which is the Mert Park, is only a three-dimensional form of a two-dimensional. I go from two-dimensional to three-dimensional. I don't think it's any different. But 2 years ago, I started a foundation called Art and Practice, and it's in the Mert Park, which is a historically black neighborhood in Los Angeles. Yes, it is in South Central. It is, I would say that it's probably middle class in the neighborhoods, mainly home. It's mainly it's a lot of homes. There's a small business district that is what you would historically, you can see the Lemert Park and the historical banners of seminal figures in the culture. There's a strong Afrocentric or diaspora beat to it. Woo! Back there. And also, it's also where my mom's hair salon was. So it became my hair salon. And then the hair salon actually became the hair salon turned into the foundation. So I'll go back. It's quite big, actually. So Art and Practice is that we have a contemporary art space, and we also work with foster kids from 16 to 22 who are emancipating out. It's job training, job placement, mental health therapy, English and math, and GED and high school placement. So it's core things. We're not doing art with the foster youth because the needs are so huge in this area in Lemert Park. The local high school is 60% foster kids, foster youth, and the junior high is 55% foster youth. It's epidemic. By the way, foster youth is epidemic in this country, but it's a silent epidemic like in the 80s AIDS was. It was like silence equals death. You know, foster youth in Los Angeles or in Los Angeles County, they're allowed to graduate with 113 credits. I think it's 230 credits you're a graduate. They're allowed to graduate with half of that, and half can be in physical education. So it's a pipeline to the prisons, it's a pipeline, I would say it's a pipeline to the pole, it's a pipeline to suicide, it's a pipeline to homelessness. But it's a silent killer. It's something, there's a lot of shame around it. And so my mom actually was an orphan, so maybe for me, watching her struggle, I might have been angry at her feeling that it was her problem. Maybe that was rage in me, but then I was probably upset about people dying in the 80s and they felt it was their problem. So this idea of silence equals death, it just kind of, so we have, so that's a job lab, and that's where they do the sort of training. This is where we work with the kids on English and math. Most do not have high school diplomas, and maybe 4th grade, 5th grade English and math. We work with 40 kids every 8 weeks, 70% job placement. They go on to get jobs, then they get an apartment, then we can talk about university. You have to almost go that way. 50-50, it's like 50% African American and 50% Latino, because foster care in Los Angeles County is 50-50. We also have artists in residence, 3 artists in residence. Everybody is next door to each other, so they're neighbors, but they don't have to work together. Now, she is working with a group of foster youth, because just through conversations, having cigarettes in the back, they started a conversation, but it's not mandatory. We have an exhibition space that we're partnering with a museum, like the Hirshhorn. Our first show was Charles Gaines. I think it's important for the local community to have access to contemporary ideas. I think it's always a lot to ask them to constantly come to us and be vulnerable, right? It's just like, oh, I want you to come to us and be vulnerable and tell us how you feel. Well, we could kind of come to them. I think we have to kind of bring the mountain to the people instead of asking the people to come to the mountain. And so it's a great collaboration with the Hammer Museum. It's going to go for 2 years, and it's contemporary art. That's all. Just contemporary art. It's not all black. It's just contemporary ideas. And the community events that happen. It's this is a building that also is another building that I bought, and this will be a cafe. It will probably be some type of job training, social service for the kids, because it's really good for young people to learn to be in the service industry so they can learn to be humble and work with the public, get their little money, you know. So that's going to probably be a job training thing where they'll work in the cafe. And the one in the green reminds me of me when I was a little kid. I work a lot with him. I would say he's self-identified as being creative. And it's I look like a praying mantis there, don't I? So it's funny though, because like going back full circle, it's the same creative impulse. I just think that now I can sort of pass it on to another young person who maybe has not seen someone that looked like him. And what I mean by that is, although the community is very traditional, I am not a traditional person. I'm kind of kooky, strange, I cry too much. I'm fine. But it's important for him to see that in the black community as existing and having a place within that narrative. I always think of the next little Mark coming up and this idea of fight or flight. I don't believe. I think that everybody can have a seat at the table. So this isn't that different than wanting to be an abstract painter and not wanting to use paint and demanding that I had a conversation with the great masters, you know, that I could sit next to Pollock. I believe that I could. But I also believe that I could have a sort of art and social service organization in Leimert Park. I'm not essential in any way. I don't ask to sit at the table. I just walk up and say, "Oh, is this seat available?" And they say yes. I sit down. You know, if you ask to sit at the table of power, they'll never let you sit. You just sit. So that's it. Thank you. So, oh yeah, you guys are very like walking over to the mic type of situation here, huh? Oh, any questions? Have I answered all your questions? Oh, the light's up, yeah. Now you know there's some questions. You just don't want to get up and ask the questions. And especially the one whooping it up in the back. You don't got a question? Yeah, you can just talk. I mean, just.
Where are all the other amendment paintings?
Where are all the amendment paintings?
Bill of Rights, like where are the other pieces?
They're all over the world. Some I think are in Brazil, and some are in on my wall. No, they're all over. They're all over. Yeah, I didn't. They went all over. Yeah, I made 8. How many amendments are there? 10? Then I made 10. They're all over. Yeah, they're all over. Not, you know.
Bill of Rights is 10. Now we have 128.
Oh. Well, I made 10. The Bill of Rights is 10. Okay, I always kind of get that a little confused, you know. But yeah, they're all over. They're all over. Mm-hmm.
So you'll have to repeat my question.
Okay, I'll repeat it for you guys.
My audience can listen. So this morning you and I had a really interesting conversation about using paper as your primary material and all of the different properties and sort of dichotomies that it presents and that you like about it, and this idea of permanence versus fragility. Maybe
Yeah.
expand a little bit on that.
I think that life is fragile. I think it's absolutely fragile. I think it's Don't fool you. It's fragile, but in that I embrace it and I feel like we're all in it together. And the material that I use is fragile. I mean, I went to see the Constitution today, and the lines were around the corner, and you walk up to it, and it's just this fragile pieces of paper under like that much glass, but it's still fragile, and it's determined. It has, I like paper because it has potentiality. I mean, just think about all the great things and all the great books that I've ever loved. I started reading when I was 11. Worlds just opened up to me when I was 11. It all came from a book, but it was all printed on paper. It's magic for me, and it's completely fragile. And I've always felt fragile, I think. My body has always been a big thing for me. What I mean by that is being 6'7.5" and weighing about 100 pounds has always been, in the public, I've never had what you call a lot of public privacy. It's considered within the social norm to ask a person how tall he is, or do you play basketball? Oh, it's a shame you don't play basketball. Was your mother tall? Was your father tall? What did you eat? What did you eat to grow so tall? You know, and it's not considered rude. So I was always kind of shy and kind of awkward, but you learn to kind of put on this face. But at the same time, you realize there's a real fragileness, because if you walk down the wrong road or the wrong street, you are such a mark. You just like stick out so much. There's no blending in. I think women understand that a little bit more. I think a woman can turn down the street and realize, whoop, this top is just a little too tight for this group. And you kind of, right, you navigate the other way. It's like, whoop, my pants are a little too tight, and I'm just better navigate around this crew. So this idea of being in the public, feeling that your body is vulnerable from the outside influences. I never felt like a sissy. I never felt too sensitive or too fragile to anything. I felt completely who I was. The only thing I was afraid of, and still to this very day I'm afraid of, is violence. That's it, violence. I just don't like to be hit. Who does? That's it. I just don't want to be hit. So this idea that your body or your race, you can be in the wrong place, and your race will determine a possible really bad outcome. I just do not drive. If I'm looking for an address, I just will not slow down. It's just something, I just won't go slow looking in certain neighborhoods. It just won't. I feel like there will be a threat. There will be suspicion, and something something may happen, or it may go very bad for me. So I just drive really fast and be completely lost. Then I text them, I'm really lost, but I'm driving fast. So what is your address again? It's just sort of inherent. But the idea of something basic. I mean, the Constitution is on paper, and what you put in a Xerox machine, photocopier, same paper. The gentleman there is holding the Mark Bradford thingy with my little picture on the back. Same paper. It's just the same paper, and you're going to take it and shred it. You know, you might look at the picture and think, oh, he's all right. He's kind of cute or not cute. Or I made sure they photoshopped that photo. No, I'm just kidding. But I just like the fragileness of it and the high and low of it. You know, the high and low of it. Oh, so you got to the microphone.
Yes, I got up. Pardon my voice. I'm getting over a cold. Hi, Mark. How are you?
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. My name is Nikki, and I'm an MFA student at George Washington University. My practice is photography, but I've been really interested in the way that African-American artists, particularly painters who are working in abstraction, sort of have to get over this obstacle in which you can't reference yourself, you can't reference your identity, you can't really reference your race through the canon of abstraction, sort of non-representational. And what I've found in your work, the way you gave yourself agency through sort of materials and cultural objects that are related to your own background. I wanted to know if you could sort of talk about a little more how working through abstraction, if you sort of dealt with the sort of the weight on your back in terms of working through abstraction, but wanting
I know
to
where you're
talk
going with
about issues of race, and just trying to find a way to sort of bring those two different ideas together.
Yeah. Well, you know what I had to get over, what I had to realize is that, I like me. And I don't have a problem with blackness. I just don't have a problem with it.
Right.
I have a problem with the easy equations sometimes associated with blackness, or maybe the boxes that people try to get you in. But I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem. I was always like, sign me up for every Black History Month show I could get when I first started. What's the problem? What's the problem? I don't want to be grouped. Why not? What's the problem with being grouped?
Right.
It's the associations and the assumptions of what that means that I have a problem with. So for me, people say, well, you're not. Do you do black art? I say, oh, absolutely. Well, I'm black, and black meet art. I guess it's black art. I don't, what am I supposed to do with that, right? Every time I look in the mirror, I'm black, so what comes out of me, it's black, because I'm black. So, until otherwise noted, so I just don't carry that. I just don't struggle with that. I have dug myself into all kinds of holes. I am just charge forward and do my thing. And if I dig myself into a hole, I dig myself out, but it's not because I've dug myself into a racial hole. I just don't carry that weight. I am, the only thing you should be responsible to as an MFA student is driving your car wherever you want to drive it. It's your car. And everything else, we say thank you for your, thank you, but when you get in your car and you turn it on, you take your car there. But I'm going to take my car. You're only responsible for your road. I don't care. That's the thing that troubles me so much, is that this responsibility issue so much. This kind of, you are responsible for something in this kind of broad brush way. Well, I'm going to totally screw it up because, there's part of me that my mother grew up in, I had a hair salon in South Central, but what do I do with all those white Santa Monica years? I guess I kind of just edited them out. And when I first started, it was kind of funny because people always constantly said, South Central, he grew up in South Central, he went to schools in South Central. And at first I kind of nod my head and think, oh, that's not exactly true, but I'll get to, excuse me, I kind of didn't. How do you make the narrative more problematic? How do you disappoint the staticness of things? How do you disappoint people who want you to just be in a box? You disappoint them with grace, and you just kind of quietly disappoint them. You don't blow your horn with it. You just kind of quietly, they just like, oh, darn. Because you have to have the freedom, and you should give yourself freedom. It's like a woman, I have my friends and they struggle, Mark, am I a feminist if I want to have a baby? I said, of course you have a baby, be a feminist. Do whatever you need to do. It's 21st century, for God's sakes. It's not black or white. So I never struggled with that. Now, I did have naysayers, and I had people say, Mark, you got to be real careful of that. This belongs very particularly to a history of art making and abstraction. You've got to be real careful of that. Bringing your narrative belong. And I just thought, I didn't sign up for being an artist to be told what to do, thank you very much. I wasn't that great at being told what to do when I was in school. That was just my thing. So I never just kind of politely kind of disappointed them. I don't argue. Do not, here's the thing. What's your name? Your name is? Noah? Nikki. Girl, you and these names. I know Nikki. Okay. I got it in my head now. Never defend your point. If you find yourself standing and defending your point, don't do it. Your position is your position. Because you know what that's going to do? It's going to remind you every time you had to defend your point to people who didn't like you, defend your point when people didn't like what you were dressing or who you were dating. Don't defend your point. Your point is your point. It's yours. Don't defend it. Period. Do your thing. And get people to support where you're trying to go. Doesn't matter what color, doesn't matter what race, just get them to support where you're trying to go. What I do? Yeah. Oh, I am there. Oh, there's. Okay. Yeah.
Peace, Mr. Mark. My name is Ade. I'm a current junior at the illustrious Howard University.
All right.
And I'm a double major in philosophy and Africana studies. And more so, I guess, to veggie back, because we don't dine with swine over here, more so to veggie back over what the sis just said about this notion of where do you go with your passion, and how exactly do you emulate that irrespective of these social constructs. So with that being said, what would be your words to a young person who's extremely passionate and creative, amplified by this unburning desire for the restoration of humanity and its evolution? What would be your words to that young person to go about the pursuit?
You know what I would really say is, I would say that we have a lot of, I think because of the internet, it reduces everything down to like a click away. We think we understand something. And we start to get away from your point of view. You're a passionate person, you're going to be passionate. I think that getting away from broad brush strokes and getting into the things that, getting into what you've been fighting for your whole life is standing right in front of you. It's your job to find it. And it's your job to make your work out of that. Really. It's not out there somewhere. It's every little nuance that you've always been. I would say that it's always like, I would go in artist studios and they would present their work to me, and I'd know they spend like half the time on that. And I said, what do you do with most of your time? Tell me what you do, Really, what do you do? You go out with your friends, you text your boyfriend 3,000 times and ask him, does he still love you? You look at porn. Come on, really, what really grabs you? You watch VH1, MTV, what are you really about? Because that will keep you up at night. That is what you will get out of bed for. Make your life out of that. If it's holding on to the bumper of your boyfriend's car, please don't go, well, that's just where you are. And eventually you get past that. So I would say, what keeps you up at night and truly what you think about, that is where you start. Not where people think you should start, not what makes sense to other people. It's kind of what we hide. We don't really reveal what we're about when we're young. Not really. We hide that stuff. And you reveal yourself really, really slow. Anybody who sits down and tells you they're going to tell you everything about themselves, honey, run. They're not going to tell you anything more. They got better game. They're not going to do that. We're not made. I don't care how many times you click on Tinder and all websites. You're not going to do that. So, do you understand that? Did you get that?
Yeah.
But you want to know specific.
Essentially, what you espouse is what I was supposed to hear. Is the notion of just beginning where you at.
And making your work out of that. Does that? I can't give, because I don't know your day-to-day. You have a strong presence, but I don't know your day-to-day. But I know that you've gotten here a certain road that has led you to be very individual and kind of break off and be on your own path. And I always applaud the young, creative people that do that. I don't know how long you've been doing it. You might have done that when you were 3 years old. So that strength that has carried you to be where you are and who you are today, I would say just keep doing that. I don't know what the container that you're going. How old are you?
I'm about to be 21 in
Wow. She says, wow, like that's just like, honey, at 21, I was thinking, well, should the part go this way? Or should I part my hair on this side? Does this outfit, you know. And when I got about 28, 29, I says, Mark, this is starting to not be a good look. So I applaud a 21-year-old to be able to get, when I see a 21-year-old in school, that means they passed SATs, they got good grades, they went to university, they went to classes at 19, 20. Good Lord. That was so not. So you know what? Bravo to you already. To have it figured out that much at 21. So I would probably say do some exploring years. Really, you've probably been in school since you were in kindergarten. So explore. have more answers than questions for a couple years. Because you've always been in a pedagogy or pedagogical situation where people have always told you what to do from kindergarten on. Just go out there and have a little fun. You don't have to do you don't do everything I did. Just have a little fun, right? You could laugh it over there. I told you about that. Should the hair go this way?
One more question, Mark.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I really enjoyed looking at all of the images. I was really struck by the highway influenced ones and the ones where you were cutting into the canvas and the ones that were draped. So I really don't have a question other than what's keeping you up at night these days?
Oh, what keeps me, Empire? No, I'm just kidding. Doesn't keep me up, but it's a cute little show. Well, little stereotypes. But, bye, Felicia. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, what keeps me up at night? You know what keeps me up at night is everything I just talked about today. Art and practice and working with the foster youth keeps me up at night. It keeps me up at night bridging different communities. It keeps me up at night wondering what race will look like in the 21st century, and are we going to be, as a North American people, heroic enough to stand out and remap what that looks like in the face of so much that's happening in the news and with bodies floating in space, and we're North Americans, and that is something that binds us together. And in the North America, we're obsessed with race more than kind of nationality, only unless we have a war. Then we become Americans and we raise the flag until the war is over, then we go back to racial. I lived in Europe for a long time, and that was the first time I felt North American. They said, oh, well, you're North American. I said, oh, no, I'm black. Because we understand in this country, we understand race and then nationality. That's just how we're taught. Chinese American, Hispanic American, we just go down the line. Whereas they would say, no, you're North American. So I had to really think about my North American identity. So I thought that that's something that kind of keeps me up. Race is a very uncomfortable subject, but we have to enter it from a vulnerable space and it's kind of a loving space to be able to make mistakes and go, oops, I didn't know. That kind of keeps me up. What else keeps me up? Keeping up with my 80-year-old mother. Yeah, she's interesting, that one. She has a trucking business now, of all things, right? You gotta love her, right? That keeps me up. Making the waterfall piece. Yeah, you know, I'm just endlessly curious about whatever I'm into. I remember I was about 11 years old, and my mom, we were going past a nightclub, and I looked and I said, ooh, I can't wait till I'm old enough to get in there. And she said, I knew you were going to go, Mark. I knew you were going to go. And for me, I graduated from a bad kids high school because it was just not my thing. And so when all my friends at 17 started going off to university, I just went to the nightclubs because that was my expression. That was where I went. That was that's what we did. So I was always just interested in that. So I'm interested in anything that I speak about. I'm very who I am and interested in what I'm doing. I'm interested in kind of pushing my work. Maybe, I don't know, somewhere. I'm always thinking about something. Thought about your hair when you were over there. I said, oh, her hair's thick. So, I'll take one more question. Oh, yeah, because you helped me with the amendment situation.
Yeah, I'm going to project here, if that's all right. Well, I wanted to comment on the piece that you had that was long strips.
Yeah, the waterfall piece.
It kept moving, but it didn't have a name.
Waterfall.
Waterfall, okay, because what they...
Right now it has...
All right, I need the microphone. Okay.
You like yelling.
Can you, well, I'm naturally loud. I'm naturally loud, okay?
Not that.
that made me think of Calder
Yes.
with the molders and stables, because supposedly he did not name the things until he got it in place.
Yeah. You know,
Okay.
I didn't, I call it the waterfall
Yeah.
because that's the only
Yeah.
name that I have
Yeah.
for it. I don't think it's going to be the waterfall
Yeah.
by the time I get it to wherever
Yeah.
I'm going to drag it
Yeah.
to. I don't think it will be waterfall, but I just,
Yeah.
the waterfall.
Yeah.
It probably
Yeah.
won't be
Well,
waterfall.
Yeah. But also that Nithra piece from New Orleans,
Yeah.
to me it looked like an ark.
It was.
Okay, well, and it is, okay, well, good, because I thought maybe
Bible.
survey, but now, what you said you still have it, where is it?
You're interesting. It was,
Yeah.
it's in storage.
Okay, well, I want to put it out somewheres.
You know what I thought? You know what I did think about putting it? I did think about that, but then I thought, okay, really, like, do I really want an ark sitting in front of my studio? No, I will do. It will find a permanent place where it needs to be. I just haven't really figured out. It's a real special piece that holds, I think, a part of history. So I don't want it just to go anywhere. I'll think about it, but it's in storage, and where is it storage? Some place somewhere. Some big storage. Very big storage. So I'm glad somebody white asked a question. I was getting kind of worried, you know. White people got to jump in a little more.
Mark, thank you so much for your presentation and
thank
for
you,
your
guys.
program. We really love hearing from you. Thank you.